We keep playing with fire, knowing it's a dangerous game. So we keep playing with fire, knowing it's a dangerous game. So we keep playing with fire.
All right. Well, today we are kicking off a brand new series called Heartsick. And I'm excited about this series really because this is one of those things that, like, no matter where you are on your faith journey, whether you've been in the church, your entire life, as long as you can remember, or if you're just kind of like checking things out, maybe somebody dragged you here, made you come here this morning, you really don't, but you're promised lunch or something like that, right? Like, no matter where you are, this is one of those things that is insanely practical, and we're hoping that it'll be helpful for you as well. So, before we jump into it, I'm going to tell you a little story about my kids, all right? So I've got two kids, Mia and Logan. Mia is 6, Logan is 4, and they could not be any more different. Like, they are complete opposites. My daughter, Mia, she does everything right, like everything by the book. She listens to everything. She apologizes for things like maybe she thinks she might have done wrong at some point, possibly, and she'll like come and confess and be like, I'm so sorry, whatever. Logan is very different. Logan, I don't think he's intentionally disobedient. I think like just the thought, the idea, the concept of listening to his parents, I don't really think it ever crosses his mind. He just kind of marches to the beat of his own drum, and we're constantly seeing the things that he does and just asking, why? Why would you do this? Like the other day, I opened up the pantry, and there was a carton of ice cream in the pantry. I was like, why? And I look at my wife, Allie, and she's like, Logan. Logan, why? And he just like kind of smiles and walks out, right? Or like my shoes, I'll find my shoes duct taped together. Or Goofy will be hanging from the top of the banister, just like left there. Or, my underwear will be out in the snow. And it's like, Logan, why? Why? Like, what was the reasoning? What was the process that went into that? Tom was, like a few weeks ago, he was setting up all the sound stuff, all the wires, everything. There's a million things going on here. All of a sudden, nothing works. And we're like, what's the deal? What happened? And then I like look over and I see Logan like walk out from the booth, and he's just got that like look on, like he found the button that turns everything off. Like, why? Why do you have to touch these things? Why do you have to do these things? We're constantly like, it's like there's no reason. Why are you doing this? Our friend is potty training their youngest child, and he's kind of getting it. He like gets the idea of going in the potty, but for some reason, when he has to go number 2, he'll like go over and he'll start in the potty, and then he gets up and he goes right next to the potty and finishes on the floor. And it's like, but why? Like, why would you do this, right? And so, like, we see a lot of that with little kids. Sometimes things don't really make too much sense. But have you ever noticed that the whole idea of people doing things that doesn't quite make sense, that don't make sense, it never really stops, Like, as we get older, we still look at people and wonder, like, why? Why would you do that? That's hurting you. That's not helping you. That's a destructive behavior. My wife, Allie, and I, we worked at a children's home, and there were some kids there who, had a little, like, some behavioral issues, and what we found is that the same kids tended to get in trouble for the same things over and over and over again. It was just like, repeat offenses over and over and over. And there was, like, one girl who was constantly running away. Like, every time she got upset, you turn around, all of a sudden, gone. She's out the door, and that was rough because everything in the house had to stop when someone ran away, and one of the house parents would have to go and find her. My wife, Allie, and I, we had to take care of an entire house of kids ages 9 to 18, and we had just gotten married. We were, like, in our early 20s. I don't know how in the world we got that job, but she would have to take care of the whole house, and I'd go after the girl and try to get her to come back. There's another boy who was constantly getting into fights constantly. And I would sit him down, and he would get suspended from school. I'd sit him down and be like, why? Why? You need to stop punching people in the face at school. Just like do something else, right? Like yell. But he would constantly over and over. And every time he knew there were consequences. He knew he was going to get suspended. He knew that when he got back to the house, there would be some other consequence, right? It'd probably be a little worse than last time because he did it again. And it's like, why? Why do we do things? Why do they do things that hurt them, that don't make sense? Have you wondered that? Like maybe you've witnessed this. In fact, I'm willing to bet you probably witnessed this. I bet you have some people in your life, maybe some family, maybe some friends, some people you know, and they just keep doing the same thing over and over and over again. And it's like, why? Why? We could have called it. You could have called it 3 weeks ago. We knew it was going to happen. Why does she continually end up with these guys that are bad for her? Why does he keep going back to this group of friends that gets him in trouble? Why do they keep making really bad financial choices? How is it that he lost his job again? Over and over and over. And it's like, why? Why do people do the things that they do? Why do we do these destructive things? I think a more difficult but more important question to ask is not why do they do things that hurt them, but why do you do things that hurt you? Why do I do things that I don't like, right? I mean, if we're honest, we all have these things. We all have these things. And the people that love us, the people that know us, know our tendency to continue to do the same things over and over and over again. Maybe, you're the girl that continues to get caught up with the wrong guy, or you're the guy that continues to get caught up with or the person who continues to make the poor financial choice, or whatever it is, fill in the blank, right? We tend to continue to make the same mistakes, and it's like, why? Why are we doing these things that hurt us? And we would look at ourselves from a distance and be like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to be the kind of person that does that. But we do it. Why? Why? Over the next couple weeks, we're going to talk about why. Why we do the things that we do that come back to bite us. The things that we wish we didn't do. We're going to look at why we do them, where they come from, and how to change it. And not just change it in ourselves, but even how to understand it in other people. And the reason, we're kicking off this church for the second time, right? The reason we wanted to start with this series is because we believe that this principle serves as the foundation for life change. To understand how to grow and make progress in life, as a person, we need to understand this concept. It's that important, and everything else really just builds on top of that. What's cool is that people, experts in the realm of psychology have come to understand this. There's a whole world dedicated to studying this. And I think what's even cooler is that this is something that Jesus explained almost 2,000 years ago. He was a little bit ahead of the game. And so, why? Why do we do the things that we do? The things that hurt us. The things that don't make sense. The things that we wish we didn't do. Where do these things come from? Well, if you were to ask Jesus, he would say, in fact, he did say, you want to know where they came from? He says, it is from within. It starts on the inside. He says, out of a person's heart that evil thoughts come. Now, back then, they had this concept of the heart, right? Which is actually remember, this was written 2,000 years ago. It was actually pretty similar to our concept of the heart. The heart The heart is like the inside, right? It's part of the inside. It is the seat, it is the home of what we believe, like how we think. It's where we feel what we feel. It's where we keep our emotions. It's where we want what we want. It's where we keep our desires. And what Jesus is saying is that it is from the heart that the evil thoughts come. Now, this like phrase here, evil thoughts come, it can be a little bit deceptive here. Like really the idea here is that these evil thoughts, it's not like random thoughts. The word there has this idea of a way of thinking. Like we get our word dialogue actually from this original Greek word. It's like a concept, a way that you're thinking. So destructive ways of thinking are set in motion. He's saying like within you, within the heart, beliefs, desires, emotions, like all of that working together, right? When they go bad, they are set in motion. They're set in motion, and that's why we see people do things that come back to hurt them. It starts from within, and it goes out. And then he just lists like a bunch of random destructive behaviors. He says sexual immorality, which like most people would hear that, like all this sexual corruption, and they'd be like, well, that's a pretty like outside physical thing. And you just be like, no, that starts in the heart. He says theft, like literally taking something that's not yours, like that's an outside thing. No, that starts in the heart. Murder, killing someone, action, no, it starts in the heart. And he goes on and on, adultery, greed, malice, deceit, lewdness, envy, slander, arrogance, and folly. It all starts in the heart. It all starts in the heart, all of these things. I had to look some of these words up. I wasn't totally sure what all of them meant, but they're all pretty destructive behaviors. And he's like, do you want to know why? Do you want to know where this comes from? It starts from within. Now, like maybe you're hearing that, you're like, okay, great, big whoop. But have you ever thought about where we put our energy? We tend to talk about, get frustrated with, and work on outside behaviors. Like the stuff that comes out of the heart. We put our energy into the behavior, not into what's happening on the inside. Like think about it. When's the last time you tried to make a change? Maybe it's a New Year's resolution. Maybe you had like this moment where you're like, I don't want to do that anymore, right? And you're like, if you were like, I'm trying not to blank, probably in most cases, I could be wrong, but in most cases, for most of us, just because of the way we think, this thing like in the blank would be some kind of outside behavior. Like I'm trying to stop yelling at my kids. Right? Like, I don't want to have these outbursts and just like yell at them, right? And so what happens? Well, we put our energy into stopping the behavior. And so, here come my kids and they're like, we've got the TV screen. My son Logan's like, whack, and decides he's going to slap some ice cream on the TV or like just do something where I'm like, ugh. And like, there's like fire burning inside of me. And I'm trying to just like keep it out and I'm trying to stop the behavior, the yelling. Right? And what Jesus would say here is that no, it starts from within. Back then, there were tons of religious teachers, people that like taught about life. But Jesus was very different from them, not just because of what he was capable of, but because of the way that he spoke. The religious teachers back then were very legalistic. They were like super, super focused on behaviors. Like do this, don't do this. You got to wash before that, and you got to go here before that happens. And it's like all like the rights and wrongs, the do's and don'ts, obsessed with outside behavior. And then all of a sudden, Jesus comes along and he starts teaching that people need to start focusing on what's going on the inside. This was crazy. This was like countercultural, right? Like at one point he said, if you see someone doing good, that came from good stored up within them. In the same way, if you see someone doing bad, like destructive things, that came from a problematic way of thinking that was set in motion. That came from bad inside of them. There's this really, really famous sermon, right? It's called the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus gave it a long time ago. He probably gave it several times. It's recorded in different versions of the Jesus story. And it's called the Sermon on the Mount because he was on a mountain. So it's just, you think they just call it Sermon on the Mountain, but it's really like a hill anyway. So he's up there, right? And he's teaching and he says like, okay, you've heard it said, don't commit adultery. Like, don't have a physical relationship with someone who's not your wife. It's like, you've heard that, right? He's like, but I say that if you look at another woman lustfully, you've already done that in your heart. You've already committed adultery in your heart. And he says the same thing about anger. He's like, you've heard it said, don't murder. But I tell you, like, when you get angry, you're already guilty of murder in your heart. Now, a lot of people read that and they're like, oh, okay, so here's Jesus Christ, the perfect guy, steps up onto the scene. He's like, I do everything right, I'm perfect, and let me tell you how horrible all you people are, right? No, what he's saying is like that like deed that you don't want to end up doing, right? Like nobody sets out one day and says, I want to be someone who kills other people. He's like, if that's your standard, if you're like, I'm going to make sure I don't kill someone, but there's all this anger going on inside of you, that's where that's going. And so stop worrying so much about the behavior and deal with the issue of the heart, because that seed grows into that tree. This is what made him totally, totally different from other people. And so, like, to kick off, like, this series, the one thing, if you walk away with anything from today, the principle that I want you to walk away with, what we call, like, the big idea for the morning. I think what Jesus would say is that outside issues are caused by inside problems. When you see something going wrong on the outside, it's because there's something wrong on the inside. Like Jesus said, there is a bad way of thinking, a bad process of thinking that is being set in motion. An outside problem, an outside issue caused by an inside problem. So I'll explain what I mean, right? I heard this story not too long ago about some orphans who were adopted from a country where, like, they weren't guaranteed their next meal. And they weren't newborn babies. They had spent several years over there. And when they came over here, they were adopted by a family who was able to take care of them and provide 3 meals a day for them. But pretty quickly, the parents realized they had a problem with these boys stealing from them. Like, the boys would steal food from the kitchen and hide it in their bedrooms. They'd, like, hoard it in their bed, under their mattresses. And so what did the parents do? Well, they do what most of us would do. They take them aside and they said, in this house, we don't steal, right? They address the behavior, the outside issue. We don't steal. That's not okay. And what happened? Well, they continued to steal. Okay, well, we're still going to steal because that's what we do. That's what we've been doing, right? But it wasn't until they realized, hold on a second. These boys came from a place when they didn't know if lunch was coming after breakfast. They didn't know if there was going to be dinner on the table at the end of the day. And so this was a survival mechanism for them. And it wasn't until, like, the belief was corrected. Once they understood, oh, we're going to have 3 meals a day, we're okay here. Do you know what stopped happening? The stealing. The inside problem, the outside issue was corrected when the inside problem was addressed. But we tend to put all our energy into the outside behavior. And it just doesn't work. So we focus, we talk about, we get frustrated with the outside behavior. But we live from the inside. So before the time that Jesus was around, there was somebody named Solomon. He was a king. He was known as, like, the wisest man ever. And he wrote the book of Proverbs. The book of Proverbs is a book in the Old Testament, and it's kind of cool. It's just got, like, all these little sayings, like little proverbs, like helpful little tidbits of knowledge. They're basically like fortune cookies, right? And in one of those things, he says, above all else, this is the guy who's known as, like, the wisest man, right, in all of history. Above all else, he says, guard your heart. Pay attention to, be aware of what's going on the inside. Another translation says, keep it with all vigilance. If you're gonna invest your energy somewhere, stop focusing so much on what's coming out and focus a little bit on what's happening on the inside. He says, above all else, do this. And you might be like, why? Why, Solomon? He says, because everything you do flows from it. Everything that's on the outside is a product of what's going on the inside. At the end of the day, it's the heart that drives the bus, right? The heart determines how we live, and we can try. Like, we can white knuckle it and try and change the behavior, but eventually the belief that's causing that destructive behavior needs to be addressed, or the behavior will just continue. This is why we often do things we don't want to do. It's why sometimes we become people we don't want to become. It's because we look at the behavior, we're like, well, I don't want to do that, so I'm going to try not to do that next time. But we don't stop and ask, why? What's going on within me that needs to be corrected? What's the belief beneath the behavior? It doesn't work. Addressing the behavior doesn't work. When I was younger, I remember one time specifically, my parents asked me to weed the flower bed. Now, when I was younger, I wasn't really very cooperative, and I wasn't thrilled about this. And so, it was a weekend, and I was kind of like procrastinating, dragging my feet, and they're out there just like, working hard. I'm like, I don't really want to do it. All I do is like weed this little flower bed. So finally, I ended up not doing it. My mom was like, okay, you know what? You got to do it when you come home from school tomorrow, then, if you're not going to do it now. So I said, okay. So I devised this master plan. It was genius. I came home, and I got home like 15 minutes earlier than she did, and I ran out to the flower bed, and I just snipped the tops of all the little weeds. And I was like, beat the system, Now, my mom right away knew something was up, because typically I would drag my feet and procrastinate, and she saw like I just came off the bus super ambitious and wanted to weed the flower beds. And so, I like saw her. I was like, all right, I'm going to go play now, the flower beds. And right away, she's like, oh, you pulled out all the weeds? And I was like, yeah. And she goes, okay, let me see the weeds. Where'd you put them? And I was like, well, she's like, did you pull them out by the root, or did you just snip the top? I was like, okay, I snipped the top. And what she knew, what we all know probably, if you have any experience with weeds, is that the weed will always grow back. Until you get to the root of the problem, the weed will always grow back. Until we learn to address the internal issue, the internal behavior, the weed is always going to come back. So let's say, think about it like this, right? Like, imagine you're a parent and you have a child, and let's say that child, at some point, somehow, developed the belief that their value to you, their acceptance, is based on their performance. Like, when they do well, they feel like they're loved by their parents, and when they don't, they feel like they're not. And so this, like, maybe probably accidentally, right? This belief develops, like, I've got to do good or my parents are not going to like me, right? Well, so maybe they go off to school, and then they encounter a class where they're not doing well. And there's a math test, and they do really poorly on the math test, and they bring the math test home, and you say, how'd you do on your test? If they understand, like, if the internal belief is that my value to my parents is based on how I perform, what do you think they're going to do? They're going to lie, right? There's an inside problem that causes that outside issue. And so maybe you say, oh, no, not in my house, right? We're going to correct that behavior. And so you sit them down, you say, in this house, we do not lie. How dare you lie? If you get a, 40 on the test, you come in, you say you got a 40 on the test, and you take away their video games and their cell phone and all things that bring them joy and just rain down the punishments, right? So you're like, you're never going to lie again. If that is what you address, and they go to school, and there's another math test, do you know what they're going to do? They might not lie, but they're probably going to cheat, right? Or maybe even worse, they'll just like work themselves to the point of exhaustion just to earn your approval. And then they'll like continue to grow up that way and eventually become adults that work themselves to exhaustion because they feel like their success is based on their performance. Their value is based on their performance. The weed will always grow back. It may grow back in a different color, but it's always going to come back until we address the inside problem. Addressing the outside problem, it just doesn't work. So, why? Why do we do the things that we don't want to do? Why do we do things that hurt us? Why do we become the kind of people that we don't want to become? Right? Like maybe for you, like, why is it that as much as you love your best friend, there's still some part of you that like really enjoys it when her boyfriend flirts with you, right? You don't want to be that kind of girl. This is your best friend, you love her. But why is it that there's something so satisfying about that? Or why is it that no matter how many times you promise you're going to be home by a certain time, or you're going to be at this game, or at that dance, or at this event, or whatever, you never seem to follow through on your promises? Do you want to be the type of parent that doesn't ever come? No, nobody does, right? But why? Why? Why is it that, like, constantly, you find yourself making poor financial decisions, right? And putting your family in a hole. Like, you don't want to be that way. You don't want to do that. Until we learn to address the beliefs beneath the behavior, we're going to live with these issues. Until you learn that your value as a person is not tied up in what boys think about you, you are never going to stop wanting the attention of any boy, whether it's your best friend's boyfriend or not. Until you realize that your net worth does not equal your self-worth, you are never going to be able to leave the office. You're never going to be able to stop working late. You're never going to want to stop trying to make more money. Until you realize that the quality of your family's life does not depend on whether or not your car is as nice as the car in your neighbor's driveway, you will never stop spending more money than you should. We won't be able to change our outside issues until we start addressing our inside problems. And that's what we're going to talk about in this series. Some of these beliefs, some of these inside problems that live within us. I'm going to ask the band to come back up here, and we'll wrap up with this story. I told you earlier about these kids at the children's home that Allie and I worked at. How there was a girl, every time she got in trouble, turn around, look at her, she's gone, right? She's down the road, running away. Over and over and over again. No matter how many times I told her there were going to be consequences, that type of behavior was unacceptable, over and over and over again, until one day. One day she left out. She went out late at night, and I went after her. And I'm walking in the street. I can see her. I'm walking. I'm talking. I'm telling her to come on back, come on back. She's not listening until finally, from like 50 yards away, I just said, "Why? Why are you doing this? Why do you have to keep running away?" And she stopped, and she turned around, and she said, "You know, as a baby, I was left in an orphanage for years. And then I was brought here, and I was adopted, and then those parents didn't want to live with me, and so they sent me to this home. And now even in this home, I am shipped around from house to house. I feel like no one wants me." And all of a sudden, in that moment, I realized that this girl just wanted somebody to chase after her. She wanted to know that she was like worth being pursued. I told you about the boy that was constantly getting into fights in school. And it like never made sense. It never made sense. Until one day I sat him down and he looked at me and basically what he said was that when he was growing up, he had a few experiences that made him feel really, really small and really, really weak. And so now, like, he is constantly looking for opportunities, as bad as they might be, like no matter how much trouble he's gonna end up getting in, he's looking for opportunities to prove to himself that he's strong. Even if it means being a bully, being suspended, right? And so it wasn't like we said, okay, well, you can keep doing that because now I understand, now it's fine. But all of a sudden, like, everything changes. Like, now we know where to put our energy. Now we know, like, the inside problem that needs to be corrected so that we can see change on the outside. And so my question for you this week, my homework for you is, like, to really take some time in your quiet time, like when you're alone, nobody else is around, maybe when you're driving to work, maybe when you're in the shower, like whenever you have a moment of peace and quiet, and think about, like, what are the things that I do that drive the people around me crazy? Like, what are the loved ones in my life constantly telling me I shouldn't be doing? What are the things that everybody sees coming and I still, like, go and do it anyway? What are the outside issues? And stop and, like, think. Why? What is the inside problem? Like, what is the belief that is driving that destructive behavior? What's the bad thought process that is being set in motion out of my heart and into my life? And it's not going to be like an overnight thing. You're not going to be like, oh, aha, okay, now I know, and the problem is fixed. But at least now we'll know where to put the work. Let's pray together. God, we are grateful that these writings, that the things that Jesus said 2,000 years ago have been somehow preserved for us to read today. That they are practical enough to be able to, like, plug into our lives here today in 2021 on Long Island. The things that Jesus said on the other side of the world so long ago can change us here today. And so, God, you see our hearts. You know our beliefs. You know the messed up ways of thinking that are being set in motion and damaging our lives. And God, we are asking that you would show us those things. In those quiet moments, God, would you show us the beliefs, the lies that have taken root within us and are hurting us and those around us. God, we want to see change. And we know that you are the one that can bring that about. And we ask you to do that for us. In Jesus' name we pray.